Love your city, every back road, every alley, every pothole. Love your city, every back road. Come together, fight for your home.
What's up, everyone? This is Bob Dalton with the LYC podcast. Each episode, I interview people that are doing grassroots work in their communities. This episode, I have the privilege to interview Terence Lester. He's the founder of Love Beyond Walls, the creator of the Dignity Museum. He's the author of multiple books, including I See You and When We Stand. He's a speaker, he's a leader, he's a student, an educator, and I could keep going on, but it's so good to be with you, man.
Likewise, man. I'm grateful to be here.
This is actually the first day that we've ever met in person. I've been admiring your work since I saw you speak at Plywood Presents, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago, and just has been following your work and getting to see all the different initiatives that you've done and all the different work that you've been doing in the community has been extremely inspiring. I want to kick off the interview by starting with when I shared with you recently, I launched Love Your City really for the 19-year-old version of myself.
Yeah.
I was 19. I wanted to make a difference in the world. I didn't know where to start. And I really want to dedicate the rest of my career to building a platform and an organization that is really tailored for that 19-year-old version of myself. And you said, man, I really relate to that. There's a lot of work that I'm doing now for the young version of me. Take us back on helping us understand who is that 16, 17, 18-year-old version of you that you're doing a lot of your work now for. Who is that person?
Man, well, firstly, when you first shared that your work was centered around a younger version of yourself, it like hit me like a ton of bricks. I remember a specific day. I was at an alternative school, and it's actually less than a mile away from our organization and the Dignity Museum, where we got a chance to meet earlier. Mm-hmm. Less than a mile away. Wow. That's the alternative school that I was going to. Like, literally, I was there, a couple of my friends was there, and there was this very specific day, like I had gotten just kind of fed up. You know how, like, you go through a lot of pain stemming from your home life or your social context, and, like, it carries over into school or work or whatever. Well, for me as a young man, it carried over into school, and I'm sitting in class, and I just stand up, and I tell the teacher, I'm out. Like, I'm out. Peace out. Like, I walk out of the classroom, and I'm walking out of the front doors of the school, and 3 of my friends, like, kind of chase me down. And so they're leaving with me. They didn't know what I was doing, but I was like, I'm done with school, period. And so we're walking away from campus. It's an open campus, and it's considered an alternative school, alternative high school, meaning, like, you got to put out of your regular high school or whatever. And so we're walking away from the school, and there was this guy experiencing homelessness, like maybe less than 50 yards away. And he's just staring at the group. And like, my buddies, they're joking around, like, you know, looking at him. Obviously, you could tell he hadn't really showered and all that stuff. And when we get to the guy, he looks at the group, but then he kind of like looks at me, like, specifically, and speaks to me. He says, is that the school that you go to back there? He was pointing at the school. I was like, yeah. He was like, he just said it. Whatever you do, don't not get your education. Mm-hmm. This guy just started talking to me like this. Like, my buddies over there laughing and having their own deal going on. And it was almost like an aside in a stage play, right? Like, I'm having this, like, dialogue between me and this guy, and he doesn't know me from Adam. He didn't know that, you know, there were times when I wouldn't stay in my own house and I would sleep in parks. He didn't know that at that moment in my life, my dad was tangibly absent. He didn't know I was put out of, you know, regular school because teachers used to label me for falling asleep in class because, you know, parts of my, you know, upbringing, I experienced, you know, homelessness myself. He didn't know all of that. Mm-hmm. And here it is. He's telling me, like, you're a leader. Don't give up on your education. You need to go back to school if you're thinking about, like, stopping. And it was this moment where it was just like, you know, call it divine, it was just this moment where I was like, I gotta find a way to continue to move forward and think of ways where I can grow bigger than what I've been around in my environment, especially as a young African-American male, right? And that conversation, bro, I'll never forget it because one of the first men or people, like it was just a few, that called me a leader came from someone experiencing homelessness.
Wow.
And when I look back, bro, and the reason I resonate so well with your story, he was literally saying, don't give up on this because one day you could possibly be like I am.
Mm-hmm.
That type of investment, that type of seeing led me to many of the things you were probably talking about, but I'm doing it for the younger Terence and the younger people that we encounter who feel outcast or like they don't belong and need that type of hope.
Yeah, and to fast forward, you're doing all this amazing work through your organization, Love Beyond Walls, and you're working toward your PhD.
Yeah, bro. I can't wait, bro.
So, like, how much longer do you got?
Probably a year, but, I just can't wait for the day where it's like, I was once a dropout or considered a dropout to walking across that stage, man, because I never gave up.
Wow. Only a year left too, man. Well, it's cool. It's crazy that the world's collided and it's so interconnected to all the way back then.
Yeah.
To fast forward, you're this close. You've done a lot of incredible work in the community, which we'll get to. And education has been a massive part of your journey, which I'm also excited to get to. But I want to start with a really, really kind of crazy story in your life. And before we dive into that story, I want to read a quote by Dr. John M. Perkins.
Okay.
He says, "There is no reconciliation until you recognize the dignity of the other, until you see their view. You have to enter into the pain of the people." And I think of that quote because you actually did that in real life, took a moment in your life and entered into trying to literally put yourself in the shoes of another person.
Yeah.
And spent a season where you went and lived on the streets or experienced being on the streets for a period of time. Take us back to what inspired that, and then let's dive into that for a second.
Yeah. Wow. Man, John Perkins.
He's a hero, man.
Yeah, he brings it, man. Earlier in, I guess you can call it my career as a nonprofit leader, even before I started the organization, one of the things my wife and I would do all the time is just like go and hang out in the city, right? Imagine early 20-somethings, instead of like just always hanging out with friends and all of that stuff, we used to hang out with each other and just go downtown and just like befriend people who are experiencing homelessness or don't have anywhere to physically stay. And I'll never forget, as time went on, I would meet so many people. And then I finally met a guy by the name of Kurt. Kurt stayed in the heart of the city, less than a mile away from one of the major shelters that closed here. And he was staying behind this building. And I just used to show up every single week, bro, and just like have breakfast with him. I'm talking about like really chopping it up with my brother Kurt, right? Like, I would get up and cook breakfast and I would bring him food, or like I would stop and grab something. I would ask him, like what he wanted or whatever. But we would just sit down on the curb or in chairs or whatever and just like do life together. It wasn't the type of like, I'm going to drop off the meal, I'm going to pat myself on the back and then I'm deucing out, right? I got to know Kurt. And for 3 months, I just sat with him and we talked about things like, he was excited that it was going to be sunny out because it had rained, and he used to use a rain bucket to collect rainwater, and he would sit it out in the sun just for it to warm up so he can cleanse himself, right? I would just learn all these like very nuanced things. And after 3 months of just like hanging out with him, he tells me his story. Like all of this time, right? I'm just like, as the quote says, I'm just like immersing myself in his world and really affirming his dignity. And he tells me, he says, man, you want to know why I'm living behind this building and all this trash? I say, no, like, tell me. He says, I was in a car accident 4 years prior to me being here. My wife and my child died. Says, I couldn't go to work like that. I use any and everything to cope. I ended up not being able to function on my job and ended up behind this building. I lost everything. And then he says, I lost a part of me. And it was like, whoa. And, like our normal response is, let's try to fix it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, Kurt, I get, I know I have friends who can get you in the shelter, blah, blah, blah. Went down this whole laundry list. And he was like, it's like, man, do you know what it's like to live in a shelter and have to stay up all night because you need to protect everything you own and possess in this bag? Do you know what it's like to be in a shelter and the shelter workers treat you as like you're garbage? He says, as a matter of fact, it's more comfortable out here behind the building in trash than it is in some shelters, not just in this city, but cities across the country. And it just hit me. So I ride home, sitting around dinner with my wife, and she says, why do you have that look on your face? And I said, Kurt challenged me, because Kurt actually told me, he says, you do it.
Mm-hmm.
You go sleep in shelters or under bridges. I was like, maybe this is leading somewhere. And so I told my wife, I think I'm supposed to like live on the streets as a person experiencing homelessness. And she says, what?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah. And long story short, man, my wife and my kids were dropping me off underneath a bridge in the heart of the city.
How much longer after that, did it happen?
It's probably 2.5, 3 weeks.
Okay.
It was just, the talking to my wife.
Mentally getting ready for it.
Mentally getting ready and just like.
I didn't realize you were out there for a month. 3 weeks.
Well, I did it 2 times with a combination of for an entire month.
Wow.
Yeah. Like eating out of trash cans, begging for dollars, for medication for some of my friends, being put out of shelters, being talked down to just blogging and journaling and just being transformed.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been asked several times, man, what was the most impactful thing that happened to me? It was seeing how much generosity is in the context of encampments and amongst people without homes, and how much selfishness contrast that. If a box of pizza came into the community, everybody would have a slice and it would be so simple for people to share. Or when my shoes got wet and it was 13 degrees outside and my toes felt like popsicle, Tony walks over to his tent and gives me his last donated pair of socks. When I needed a blanket, Mark walks to his tent and gives me one of his extra blankets. When I was being, uncomfortable from the jagged rocks poking me in my side, my friend Robert would teach me how to position myself and give me certain things that would make this whole. And it was just man, I'm around people every day who have access to things, but yet, some people, not all people, because I don't want to generalize people, but we have a lot of close-fistedness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I just saw a lot of generosity and it radically changed me.
What's powerful about that is just because they don't have a home doesn't mean they don't have a community.
Right.
That's crazy.
And we need to redefine how we even define community or talk about it.
Yeah. And what I love about you and what I've quickly picked up on as you're doing a deep dive in education and you've written a couple books is that you have done an incredible job of defining and helping redefine a lot of these words. It's really important. And I'll get to that in just a second. But one thing before we move on from this particular story is as you share in your book, I See You, which we're going to reference quite a bit, you list out common assumptions about the poor.
Yeah.
And you list out, and this is like the way I tell my story is that like I would drive by people on the street and whisper under my breath, go get a job. And then my mom ends up living on the streets, and that completely changed my paradigm because she's the hardest working woman I know.
Mm.
But the assumptions that you list out are lazy, uneducated, they choose to be poor, it's the government's responsibility, I can't understand or relate to them, the poor are just criminals, it's their fault, they made some sort of choices in their life to cause them to end up being there.
Yeah.
With all of that list of like all of these biases toward the homeless community, which one prior to your journey being on the streets and being in that community, which ones were you struggling with the most? What was some of the biases that you were actually carrying into that experience?
Yeah. Well, for me, I had gone through it in my teenage years. So what was happening for me, finally finishing high school, going to get some college education, eventually getting married, getting plugged into a community of faith and like growing, I started to see what I had gone through and understand it on a deeper level. Because like, when you go through trauma or have any type of like trauma type pain in your family and like you go through all these situations, when you're in it, you don't necessarily know how it impacts you and you can't even really fully articulate what you've experienced. So, finally getting to a place where, I'm stable, I'm doing a lot of different things. I have a stable marriage and have kids. And then it was this moment where like, I need to go back. Right. And so for me, going back opened my eyes and gave me a deeper understanding of what I had experienced throughout my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, oh, like, that's what I felt like when I didn't belong. Or, oh, like, that's what I felt like when I was experiencing isolation. Or, oh, like, that's what I felt like when people were labeling me. So it was like these aha moments, which deepened my articulation around the subject, because it's like, no, this is not just something that, I'm passionate about. This is something that I've lived. This is something that I've gone through. This is something that I could, empathize with on a deeper level. And I can articulate it better now because I've done the inner work to heal and to really understand my contribution and how my story has empowered me.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess for me, bro, it was more like making the connections and having deeper understanding as to like what I had actually experienced.
Yeah. And like when you were on the street and you were part of this community, was there anything that stood out to you like, man, that really shifted my personal perspective on?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I can tell you like, leaving the comforts of your home, I mean, it makes you nervous. And like, what if something happens to me? Like those types of things was playing over and over in my mind, almost every single second. What if somebody pulls a gun out on me? Or what if something goes sideways or whatever? And just as any campaign that I've ever been on to raise awareness or bring attention to stuff, I had to come to this place where like I asked myself, if this is it, or if something was to happen, would I be willing to die for this? Like literally.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I reconcile it is that I'm like, yeah. And that kind of reduces the fear, because if something was to happen to me, I would be in the place of meaning for my life.
Yeah. And this was a spiritual journey, a journey of education.
All of that.
And then there's people that they don't have a choice. Like this is their daily reality of like, I could die.
Yes. Legit, like literally. Like when I was standing on the corner with Tony, we asked 427 people for $1. We got 11. we needed like $90 for his medication.
Mm.
And he needed the medication to live.
Which kind of leads me to, you define poverty in your book as a lack of access.
Yeah.
When people think of homelessness and they think of some of these common assumptions of lazy or uneducated, or they should just bootstrap their way out of it.
Yeah.
What you really helped me understand through your book was like, it's the lack of access, and there's all these ways that, like, it's not that they just can go get a job.
Right.
There's things that have to happen that are
right.
huge. Talk about some of those processes.
So, okay, I'll give you one case in point. We had a few gentlemen that we were working with who were actually staying in our community. And, one of them had been out of touch with family members for, like years. No ID, no birth certificates, no social security card, no vital record, right? And so sometimes we would be out in the community and he would like literally tell us, people used to yell that phrase, go get a job, like at him. But he was like, bro, like how can I get a job and I don't have an ID? You need an ID to do basically everything, to cash a check, to get a house, to get employment, to drive a car, to, you name something, right? To open a bank account, like all of these things, right? And so one piece of identification can keep, close a world of opportunities, from you, right? And, but here's the kicker, bro. You need ID to get what? ID. But you need an address to get what? ID. So how do you break the cycle or get out of the cycle of like not having access or even having the opportunity to advance yourself? Like, long story short, we ended up having to hire an attorney to solicit birth records, which it took 8 months for him to get his birth certificate after I wrote a letter to say, hey, we validate this person being a part of our organization. 8 months.
Just so he can get his ID.
Just so he can get his birth certificate. Then we had to figure out a way to have that birth certificate be accompanied with something to get his social security card. Because you need 2 forms of ID. So it actually almost took a year for him just to get identification. And the whole time, everybody's like, why you don't just get a job? And it's like, yo, like, it's not that simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's complex.
Yeah.
Is what we're saying.
That was huge, a way of understanding poverty. The way that I've described poverty in the past, and I would love your feedback and perspective on this, is poverty is determined by how far out you can see. So what that means is you and I are people that we're planning 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road.
Oh, wow.
And some people are like, where am I going to eat next? Where am I going? Like, they're thinking survival right in front of them, 1 foot in front of them.
Yeah.
And kind of an experiment that I've been thinking about is like, people need help really understanding a bigger vision, being able to look further down the road. The only way that they can look further down the road is if their primary basic needs are met in the immediate. Yeah. So they can see down the road a little bit further.
For sure.
And that level of poverty is getting pushed out.
For sure. Yeah. It's a great way to describe it. It makes me think about, sometimes I sit around and talk to some of my friends and we talk about like, what book are you reading? And it's like, oh, like I just learned this and I just read that article. And it's just like, you have the space and the margin to think about what it is you want to consume to what? Grow. And that's essentially what you're saying. Mm-hmm. You can't even think about how you would want to grow or be intentional with certain aspects of your life because you're thinking about the immediate. Like, I can't think about what I want to do next week when I need a meal for today. And this goes to a statement that is often normally said to me because people always ask me my opinions on like relief work versus development. And I think they go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And I normally restate the quote. It's, teach a man how to fish, you can feed him for a lifetime, right? But if you give a man a fish, you only feed him for the day. And my philosophy on it is that if you don't give the man a fish sandwich while you're teaching him how to fish, he'll pass out before he learns anything. You feel me?
Yeah, he's got to, at the end of the day, at least get him a fish.
Yes. Wow.
No matter, whether or not, maybe we might not have the time to teach him how to fish before he passes out from not even getting food in the first place.
Come on, man.
So it totally makes sense. And what do you say? I'm sure you get asked this all the time. Should I give money to people on the street? How do you answer that? How do you break that down?
Man, that's hard. Here's my take on it. Because a large part of my life has been centered around creating the type of rhythms in my life where I can not just give money. I have the margin of time where, like, if I see somebody, I notice them, I create my schedule in such a way where, like, I'll give 10, 15, 20 minutes and just, like, really notice a person and get a chance to dialogue and see how might I be of support with any type of resources that I bring to the conversation. And then there are other times when I'm just, like, really moved. And I will. And I don't make a big fuss about it or try to, like, it's just like one of those things where I feel, if I feel
case
at peace,
by case.
yes, case by case. And if I feel at peace in my heart about it, I do.
Yep.
Let me tell you, man. We were just recently moved to do this similar thing, and little did I know, we were doing this for a family of 7 staying in 2 cars, and it was like we had no idea. But my wife and I, we felt really compelled. And long story short, we started forging this relationship. The family right now has housing and all that stuff, but it was just like one of those things where it was cold and the kids needed coats because they were sleeping in cars. Like in the winter, bro. Imagine being a kid waking up cold, going to sleep cold in a cramped position, and you go to school and you don't even have a coat. Why wouldn't I give to that? I'm not going to withhold because I used to be that kid. You know what I mean? I have kids. So there's a greater level of empathy. And then the other thing too, man, is like when you talk to people, you have to have discernment. You have to be able to have that type of listening ear where you can ask the right questions, listen to the heart of the story. And then like I've been doing it for so long, I can pick up on if someone is just like jacking me around, or like I can really hear. Also like one of my degrees is in counseling. So like that's this is
You're
skill.
trained for it.
Yeah, I'm trained for it. But like I can just hear. And I've been with so many different types of people and been proximate. Like that's just a skill like you really learn.
Yeah. One way of looking at it too, that's helped me understand like the discernment and who to give to. There's a Jewish parable that's like, it's better to give to 10 people who are claiming that they're in need in case that one of them is a fraud.
Wow.
Or in case that 9 of them are a fraud.
Wow.
In case that one is not a fraud.
That's powerful.
Then it is to not give to all 10 in case that one is not a fraud. So it's
That's
like,
deep.
it's better to give to all 10 in case one is not a fraud. You know what I'm saying? So,
meaning that it's not on you to even know.
It's not on you to even know. That would be the ideal situation, you know, but it's like, maybe some people do need it, maybe some people don't. But like the people that really do need it, like let's not rob them from an opportunity for being helped in the name of, you know, us being the fraud police, you know, like really trying to figure out who's faking it and who's not, or who's actually in need, or who's going to spend whatever the things that we kind of tell ourselves to justify keep driving.
Oh yeah,
you know,
bro. Like I feel that on so many levels, man.
And never give out guilt too. That's why I feel like that's a big thing that I love sharing with people is like, don't give out a guilt. If you feel like you're going to feel guilty for not giving, just chill for a second, check yourself, see where you're at. But yeah, it's a question that comes up a lot, and it's very, very minor. And the whole large scheme of things, but I do think it's a fascinating one because what it is it's an individual wrestling with where they're at with a particular problem.
Yeah.
An issue that they are driving by, I call them, myself included, green light racers. You're like trying to hit the green light. So you're not faced with stopping with the reality of something that actually exists in your community,
Yeah, bro, I've been teaching my kids that. And one of the reasons how is that, like, my son and my daughter, like I normally say that I don't ever use service as a punishment for my children. That's a bold statement, right? But I don't, because service and the opportunity to see someone as deserving of dignity should be a core value. I've taught it them since they were like, couldn't even talk. This is a part of our family, and it's so much embedded into the fabric of who we are. It's just like going to the park. It's just like going to the movies. It's just like going to serve. It's just like seeing someone who society looks down on that deems as them being unworthy. It's just like seeing that person and seeing the best parts of humanity in them, right?
Yep.
John Perkins is also a person that I've read often. He has this, I kind of adopted this philosophy. You can't give anybody dignity. Mm-hmm. You can only affirm it. Mm-hmm. That's deep. When you think about it, all of us possess dignity because we are breathing, we're living, and we're, alive. The fact that we are alive denotes that we possess dignity. There's another quote that I like that says, everyone is deserving of dignity, no matter how damaged or harmed the shell that carries it. That's powerful when you think about it. And I was just looking up a quote that goes along with what you were saying, and it goes this way: the moment we choose to acknowledge someone in pain, we have to decide whether we will respond with love, generosity, and grace. Mm-hmm. Isn't that powerful? The moment that you, like you were saying, avoid being the green light,
green light racer.
Yeah, racer. And you notice someone, and if they are in pain, that means you're putting yourself in a position where you have to decide whether you would ignore or choose to respond with love, generosity, and grace.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if you don't have anything to necessarily materially give, like look at them in the eyes, and acknowledge them.
Ask them their name.
Yeah. See them. Even if you're just driving by.
Yeah.
See them. Yeah. Look at them. I wrote a spoken word a couple years ago, and the ending of it is...
you do spoken word, bro?
No. I just wrote... There was a season where I wrote like 3 or 4.
Okay.
But at the end of it, it was about homelessness, but the end of it is, now when I see people on the street, I don't just drive by. I look at them dead in the eyes, and I see them as people, not projects. I see them as people, not objects. I see them as our brothers and our sisters and our fathers and our mothers. You see, my mother has taught me that not all people choose to become homeless, that some just need a second chance and some just need a helping hand, and they all at least deserve a glance from us to see that they exist. And I feel like for me, and a big part of like the work that I've wanted to do through Sackcloth and Ashes, my business, and with Now Love Your City, is that I want to inspire people to notice people.
That's good.
And on that note, I feel like I'm really was able to try to get to the core of the work that you're really doing. And we're going to get to the work that everyone sees you doing with Love Beyond Walls and Dignity Museum, and we're going to land the plane with that here in a bit. But I feel like I cracked the code on some of the work that you're doing at the very core of it, which is that you want to inspire people to take a look at themselves and check themselves and figure out where they are really at in the pain and everything that they're going through in order to be able to see other people and be able to relate.
Yes.
And so I got a couple quotes here that you've shared. One is, how we see other people can reveal where we are at in our journey of addressing our own inner spiritual poverty. And I feel like that right there made me see that your part of your work is going, look, sure, we can join some volunteer group.
Right.
We can go out and serve. We can go out and pass out things. But unless we're willing to really do work on our own selves,
Yeah.
we're going to constantly have a difficult time of really seeing people in like a humility aspect.
Yes.
Because if you see people from a tangible possession standpoint,
Yeah. This
good. Is how little they have, or this is how much they have, you're actually revealing something within yourself that needs to be addressed.
Yes. Bro, that's spot on, man. The world is weird in that we measure worth of a person or worth of things based upon all of these extrinsic things. Like,
Mhm.
Where do you go to school? What do you have? What do you do? What crew do you run with? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like we leverage all those things to define whether or not a person is worthy. But I say, no, man, let's start within, which is one of the reasons or metaphors of Dignity Museum, because it's housed in a shipping container. Outside is just like this beat up red shipping container. But the messaging is you have to actually go inside to see the beauty.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that deep?
Mm.
Like, if we adopted that type of philosophy to understand that none of us are perfect, right? We're all broken in some way, or we've all experienced some type of pain, but there's still beauty wrapped up on the inside of us. And if we can figure out or crack the code on how to affirm the inherent worth and value of every single person, no matter their social location they're emerging from, man, this world would be an amazing place.
Yeah.
While also learning to deal with your own inner.
Yeah. And if
jump.
you understand that, like it's not them and us, it's we.
It's we.
We are going through things. We have gone through things. Nobody's exempt from difficult circumstances. And you wrapped up an interview that I listened to, and he was asking me like, what's one thing that you leave for everyone, and you were like, your final words were, give yourself more grace.
Yeah.
Give yourself grace. And I was like, wow, what a powerful thing coming from someone who's leading a nonprofit and doing community work. I thought you were going to drop some I just want to inspire everyone to go out and get involved, and you were like, I want everyone to just give yourself some more grace. And I was like, that is so powerful. Why would you say that?
Yeah.
Like that, out of all the things you could have said to try to inspire.
Because I think, man, when I interviewed with Inky, the pandemic was crushing to a lot of leaders.
Mm.
Things shifted in organizations, several pivots. Some people are in sustained pivots. I am a leader and I'm in an organization, and aspects of what we used to do, I'm still in the sustained pivot, right? And as much as we want to like put on our hero capes and like show up or like, be as strong as we can be, I think an aspect of that is not being vulnerable or having that sense of vulnerability that allows yourself to breathe, but also to find resilience in the fact that it does not have to be perfect. If you are committed to showing up, give yourself grace and don't be so hard on yourself to reach some type of expectation or societal pressure that you place on yourself. The reason I'm still doing the work today is not because I have a success metrics or metric of success that looks like some, large numbers, this and blah, blah, blah. No, it's like I've given myself grace to show up and say, if I just meet one person, if I notice one person, like I still carry that on my laptop. You can ask my wife, because I know that if I'm constantly trying to reach all these expectations, it's going to break me, bro. And like, I don't have that type of strength. And maybe you're someone that's listening to this and you feel like you put too much pressure on yourself and you need to be reminded to give yourself grace. Like literally, I have to tell myself that every day. I don't care writing a book or doing school or whatever, interviewing with Bob, you know what I mean? Like, or being on some podcast or whatever it is. Bro, I never allow those types of things to define if I'm killing it or not.
Your personal worth.
My personal worth. Because all of that stuff, you know what I mean? It's like, if the moment I start using all of that stuff to define my personal worth is the moment that I've left the mission and the call that I originally started with.
Yeah. And I feel that through your writing and your work.
Yeah, bro.
A quote by Ye.
Oh, yeah. Come on with it.
Personal worth is not what a person is worth.
Ooh.
And another quote by you, man. I love quoting you because you got so many good quotes. Once we recognize that our own true worth is independent of our possessions, we can begin to see dignity and worth in those around us and in ourselves.
Yeah.
So stripping yourself of your worth is not defined by how much you have or how little you have. Your personal worth exists apart from that, which is going to allow you to see the worth in other people despite how much they have or how little they have.
Yes. Bro, I was in Chicago. I was speaking at a conference. And in between sessions, my wife and I would like walk the city. Chicago is like really windy. I mean, especially during the winter, it's cold. And so my wife didn't go with me. I think one of my other friends did, and we were walking through the city, and I was going to walk to like a nearby store to get something to eat and come across his brother. He was young. He may have been 27, like mid to late 20s. And he says that he was hungry. And we were right outside this chicken joint. I think I write about this story in ICU. And I said, never mind, bro. Let's just walk on in and get some chicken. You want some chicken? He was like, yeah. And we walk in, and in concert, everybody behind the counter looks and like gives these cold stares and mean mugs. I looked up the minimum wage that these persons were making. They were making not a living wage. Many of them, like if we were just could have been in poverty themselves. Mm-hmm. And this is the thing, like there's so much disdain around who we are and how we show up, whether we have an address or not, whether we work in a place that, serves chicken or not, or like if you're ringing up a cat. I don't care where we are, who you are, what your job you have or your role, you're worth it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's like, we need to adopt and have that type of mentality because one, it keeps us humble. And two, you never know who you are talking to or the type of investment you can make in a person by just giving them an uplifting word or spending time with that person. Like, bro, I wouldn't be who I am today, bro. Like if people hadn't pulled me aside and saw value in me when I was at my lowest. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? My mentor who passed away, Mr. Moore, he saw that in me, man. Like I remember when I was like asking him, should I put myself through college? I would be the, first graduate, male in my family. You know what I mean? Like, should I marry her? Should I? And he was just like, yeah, just kind of championing me on. He's one of the reasons why I started Love Beyond Walls, because he would always tell me one day you'll be able to, use your pain and your story to impact and inspire people. And I just kept listening, bro. And so, he passed away right when I started the organization. He doesn't even, he didn't get a chance to see Dignity Museum. He didn't get a chance to see like students that come or like people who are impacted. But what he did see was the seed that he was planting in me. He saw my worth even before I saw it. And that's what we're called to do. And that's the type of life I want to live. I want to be able to say, I saw the worth in that person when nobody else did.
Yeah. Some people might be listening to this and being like, when is Bob going to get to the work that Terence is doing? Yeah. And I want to say this, that we have been talking about the work. This is the work.
That's
the work. What I want to make the point is that the work is you going and spending time with people on the street and you diving into pushing yourself in the realm of education and you working your ass off in the gym. I see you, bro. You're working hard.
Yeah.
That is the work so that you can have this expression of what you're calling the Dignity Museum and the expression of Love Beyond Walls. That's the expression that's coming out of you fighting to really understand your personal worth so that you can love people well.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the biggest misconceptions in the whole giving conversation or the give back conversation or the nonprofit sector, whatever, is that it has to start with you figuring out where you're at.
Yeah.
And doing that work spiritually, emotionally, physically, so that you can better step up and be a contributor to your community and the people around you.
Yeah.
And I think that that's missed.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we see so many leaders dropping off one at a time, is because there's not that foundation that is laid so that when they start doing those expressions of big work and community work and things that are more public, they are not prepared from an individual standpoint.
Right. Which is another reason, to my point, give yourself grace, because that means give yourself space to grow.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And most people don't do what you're talking about. And so, yeah, bro, you have to be really intentional about growing. It's not perfection. Like, it's not like you're going to have it all figured out. I think what you're saying is like having that posture of heart to say, I'm going to move in this direction and I'm not going to pull away from where I'm headed.
Yeah. Just the personal work is like, if you're going to step out and give or contribute in your community, and you're doing it before understanding that it's not about how much or how little that you have, then you're going to enter into that time thinking you're a hero.
Facts. And you'll end up comparing yourself. Because, bro, this work is hard.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not in the work because the work is a part of your heart, soon when things go up and down, you're going to quit it. And that's what I was alluding to earlier when it's like, you can quit what you do, but you can't quit who you are. This is a part of who I am, and I'm not quitting that. So
the expression of the work. Dignity Museum, how long after you spent time on the street to you launching Dignity Museum, and what kind of inspired that vision? Man, it was 4 years later. And, one of the things that was inspiring me during that time was like coming up against a lot of the narratives that I write about in the book. It was like, isn't this person just on drugs, or like all people experiencing homelessness have a mental health problem and this and that? And it was just like, no, let's just like figure out a way we can create something where people can challenge their embedded biases or narratives that they bring to this conversation. Because most of the times when you think about it, people who control the narrative around the experience of homelessness are people who have never been it. Or, people who have these opinions about it are people who haven't necessarily spent time with or been in proximity to those folks. And so, we wanted to create this immersive experience where people could see the myths and the facts and get an understanding that mental health and drug addiction isn't the leading cause to a person experiencing homelessness. It's actually job loss. And right now in the current context, because the dollar is eroding by the second and inflation is kind of gobbling it up, we see a lot of people not being able to afford different things, and just giving people space to wrestle with some of those ideas and truly get to see the other side of the experience of homelessness, not just the side that we bring with our preconceptions of what we think it's like. Yeah, and so break down what the Dignity Museum actually is. It's a shipping container. Shipping container. You redid the entire inside. I got to be in it this morning. It's unbelievable. There's quotes on the walls. There's stories you can hear audibly. There's a documentary that you can look at and view. And so you have all these different variables to really tell what's the narrative that you're really wanting to share through that experience. Because you're giving tours all the time.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, man, because different people take away different things. I guess a large part of what I'm doing is centering the voices that have been silenced. You know, in my younger years, I used to, adhere to this notion like we're giving a voice to the voiceless until I started doing the work for an extended amount of time. And I realized that everyone has a voice. Some are silenced, others are heard. And with the type of privilege that I have, I'm acknowledging parts of that. I want to be able to steward it well and pass the microphone. Similar to what you're doing with Love Your City, bros. Like, how can we create space where you pass the microphone to center the voices of those who are doing the work? Where I was like, how can I pass the microphone and center the voices of people who have the courage to wake up and go through the experience of homelessness?
Yeah.
Let's not learn from second and third hand information. Let's learn from the sources.
Yeah. And to everyone listening, if you want to check out more about the Dignity Museum, it's dignitymuseum.com.
Yeah.
And then Love Beyond Walls.
.org. Yeah.
.org. Love Beyond Walls. Like, break that down. Like, what was kind of, this is like the umbrella, right?
Yeah, man. So Love Beyond Walls has two audiences. And in my heart, I want to bring people together who otherwise would never come into contact with one another. Like the essence of the name, tearing down walls, like love beyond walls. Like that's what it means. I wanted to build a community that would be able to support people just like I once was, to be able to walk alongside folks. All of the things that we've done, like sheltering and access to showers and, mobile grooming and like laundry and like all of those things are just vehicles just to be in relationship.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You're giving a lot of people opportunity to connect resources to people in need.
Yes. But greater than that, there are opportunities to show up to be in relationship. Bro, like one of the hugest barriers to escaping impoverishment and or homelessness is social exclusion, a lack of social equity. What I mean by that is or social capital. People need people. For instance, if you pick up your cell phone right now and if something was to happen, chances are you have many people you can call. Like if you have no one to call, who do you call? And so like my heartbeat has always been like, how can we create a community where people feel supported, seen, and feel like they have a place to belong?
Would you say that Dignity Museum is more of the educational aspect of what you do and Love Beyond Walls is more experiential?
Experiential, community building, community engagement.
Because you have a lot of different kind of initiatives that you've launched during COVID and now you're working on now. You do a lot of collaborations with companies, which is awesome to see.
Yeah.
You're providing opportunity for corporations to get involved on a local level.
Yeah. So, and to my point, it's like, not only are we creating opportunities for organizations to come volunteer and serve, but my biggest piece is like, let's educate you while you're doing this. And not just like educate you. Once you get that educational piece, you see how important it is for you to be proximate and present to create the community to walk alongside individuals who may need your support.
And you're doing Love Beyond Walls work around the nation.
Yeah.
And a lot of it here in Atlanta, right?
Yeah.
What's kind of your hope looking down the road here in the next few years of an initiative or some of the projects that you kind of were alluding to earlier? What are some of the things you want to do through Love Beyond Walls community-wise here in Atlanta?
Yeah, man, I would like for us to grow into a space where we are educating leaders, thinkers, political figures who influence policy, especially the ordinances that criminalize the experience of homelessness, and create almost like this hub where people would come and not only be trained, but, think of ways that they could develop more empathetic communities, but also that being the base, but it also supports the community of people that we walk with every single day. So it's like this constant,
like community center, educational center.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
and
what
then
I'm dreaming about, bro.
Do you see maybe even Dignity Museum being involved in that, where it's like this entire...
It's gonna be it's gonna be at the base, bro.
Where do you see the perfect fit for that? Like a downtown type of thing in Atlanta?
Yeah. That's the dream,
epic.
bro.
That'd be epic.
Could you imagine, like...
So sick.
Yeah.
It's got to happen.
It has to,
I believe
man.
it. Yeah. I believe it. And I think you're on that path of making that happen. I mean, it's a lot of good things happening for you, man.
Yeah.
And a lot of people rooting you on. Like, a lot of people rooting you on. I feel like I know that there's times where it's like, oh, this work is tough. You're plowing through and everything. But just know that, like, I'm rooting you on. And I know a lot of people are cheering you on and also supporting you, man. I
appreciate
think
that, man.
It's really, really cool to see people stepping up and supporting your organization and the work you're doing and how you're a convener. You're a convener. You're providing opportunity for people, which is amazing.
Yeah.
So if you want to check out Love Beyond Walls, lovebeyondwalls.org, or if you want to check them out on Instagram, it's at Love Beyond Walls.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm inspired by our conversation and just our small time together and the first time we ever meet in this way. I'm inspired to do work on myself and get myself in a position where I can be a better contributor.
Yeah.
And that's really what I'm taking away from today is show more grace upon myself, do work on myself, really work to understand my personal worth so that I can, in a healthy way, understand how to love the people around me better. So thank you for taking time. I know a lot of people will be inspired by this conversation. We're inspired by the work that you're doing in the community here in Atlanta. Last question I want to ask is, why local? Why do you feel like taking an initiative and acting local is important?
Yeah. I think local gives you an opportunity to make direct change where you are. I think local multiplied actually creates national impact. So many times, like, people are just so focused on, like, let's, like, change the whole thing. It's like, hold up, pump your brakes. What are you doing in your backyard? What are you doing about what's across the street from you? And so it's cool to think about, you know, problems on a more national, global level. But then my question is, how are you showing up with your passion for that right in your backyard, right in your front yard, or right around you? Because if you can't do it around you, like, why are you thinking about doing it in those types of ways?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for doing this interview and keep up the good work.
I appreciate it, man.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Love Your City podcast. If you want to find ways to get involved in your community, you can visit loveyourcity.org. If you have any questions or recommendations of grassroots leaders or nonprofits that we should be aware of, email us at media@loveyourcity.org.